So Republican Senator Tom Tillis went absolutely scorched earth on Donald Trump and the big, beautiful bill, so much so that Mitch McConnell said this is a major setback for the GOP in the Senate. But I sure was glad to see, as we was going through the process of reading the bill out loud and more people were talking about it, I was glad to see people like Tom Tillis stand up and just say what needed to be said. Now, Tom Tillis has announced his retirement, so he's no longer going to be in the Senate after this. Well, this is going to be a hell of a note to go out on, for sure. And so I'm not familiar with Tom Tillis. I don't know a whole lot about him, but I am glad that in this moment in time, he stood up and said the things that he said, because, folks, the truth of the matter is, once this is all over for Donald Trump, it's not going to be all over for the people who hitched their wagon to him. There's going to be a whole lot of people going forward in years to come that are going to have to answer for what they did and what they stood for with Donald Trump. For whatever reason, he's Teflon Don. Nothing ever seems to stick to him. He always seems to weasel out of things and get away with things. But there's going to be a whole lot of people left in the coming years that are going to have to answer for the times they stood with Donald Trump, and they're not going to have his cult of personality to get it over with the crowd. They're going to completely bury their careers, and I think we're going to see that as we go forward. But we're going to watch a couple of clips here from Tom Tillis because he just came out swinging. I'm sure Donald Trump is extremely upset over this, but these things needed to be said. So let's play the first clip here, and then we'll talk more about it.
But somebody, a self-described philosopher in a think tank that I admire a lot, but I realize if you're a philosopher and you're in a think tank, you by definition have never worked in an operational role. So you can't possibly understand what happens to this pipeline of power purchase agreements and the future of our grid. So here's what's going to happen. Wipe it clean. Put an excise tax in. Effectively throw the football in the end zone, spin it, and walk away and do the party dance. And what you have done is create a blip in power service, because there isn't going to be a gas-fired generator anytime soon. Folks, the generators necessary to create power with gas, best case 5 years from now. That's best case. 5 years from now. So you can't get that online at the same time this whole pipeline is going down. So I want that philosopher to tell me that he understands how to plan out power over time, and to let me know that when all these projects fail, some will make it, some will get subsidized, some will go bankrupt, so it won't be Armageddon, but it's going to be a problem. So they better get it right. It's another example, folks, when you rush a bill and you don't think through the implementation, you don't get it right. And so I hope that my colleagues recognize it's half-baked. It's another reason why we should go back to the House, Mark, get Medicaid right, so I can come on the floor and tell my colleagues on the other side of the aisle why they're wrong on all the attributes of the House, Mark, why they are wrong on some of their characterizations of the tax bill, and why they will be wrong on an energy policy that makes sense. But I have to vote against the bill from my own party that I have never parted from before, because we're rushing to an arbitrary deadline with people who have never worked a day in this industry, maybe philosophized and written a few white papers on it, but haven't gotten their hands dirty. I have, and this is another segment of the bill that needs to change. Thank you.
I love how he brings home the point that if you've not actually worked in these roles and you've never actually worked an honest day in your life, then you cannot possibly know what it is that you're talking about. And I would also like to throw Donald Trump into that, because I've said so many times here on the channel that Donald Trump has never worked an honest day in his life. He truly doesn't know or understand what his followers go through on a day-to-day basis. All he's ever done is just capitalized on the things they hated, the things that they feared, and he stirred the pot and created a bunch of division. And that's what makes him thrive. And he wants to push through this big, beautiful bill to give himself and his administration even more power, and to give his billionaire buddies all the tax breaks in the world. And these things are going to fall back onto the backs of his own supporters. And I'm sure he'll find a way to spin it and blame it on Democrats. But here's Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, basically saying, what am I going to say to my constituents? How do I go back home and sell this to them when they feel the effects from it? Take a look.
State-directed payments and the cuts scheduled in this bill, there's a reduction of state-directed payments. And then there's the reduction of the provider tax. They can't find a hole in my estimate. So what they told me is that, yeah, it's rough, but North Carolina's used the system. They're going to have to make it work. All right. So what do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys? I think in the White House, senators advising the president are not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. And you know, the last time I saw a promise broken around health care, with respect to my friends on the other side of the aisle, it's when somebody said, if you like your health care, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. We found out that wasn't true. That made me the second Republican Speaker of the House since the Civil War, ladies and gentlemen, because we betrayed the promise to the American people. 2 years later, 3 years later, it actually made me a U.S. Senator, because in 2010, it had just been proposed. And just anticipation of what was going to happen was enough to have a sea change election that swept Republicans into the majority for the second time in 100 years. Now, Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care and betraying a promise. It is inescapable that this bill in its current form will betray the very promise that Donald J. Trump made in the Oval Office or in the cabinet room when I was there with finance, where he said we can go after waste, fraud, and abuse on any programs. Now,
see, these senators and congressmen deep down know that when they go back home, they've got to face their constituents, and they have to face them once the shit hits the fan, and now they're paying the price for something Donald Trump pushed through. It's all going to come crashing down on their heads, and then how are they going to explain it? They're not going to be able to sit there and weasel out of interviews the way that Donald Trump does on Fox News. They're not going to be able to tweet in all caps and get away with it. It's going to land on them. When the shit hits the fan, it's all going to blow that way away from Donald Trump, and it's going to land right on all of them, and they're going to have to explain it. And they know that. And so that's why I feel like Tom Tillis is like, you know what, I've got to stand up and tell the truth here. And I think more Republicans deep down are probably thinking the same thing. Donald Trump is breaking promises. He's keeping some of the worst promises and breaking some of the biggest promises that he made to his followers, and we're seeing that. But I love what Tom Tillis says in this next clip when he just calls Donald Trump out for what he truly is. He's completely misinformed. Take a look.
President, over the course of the evening, I may look for an opportunity to speak again. But I'm telling the president that you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate mark will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. I love the work requirement. I love the other reforms in this bill. They are necessary, and I appreciate the leadership of the House for putting it in there. In fact, I like the work of the House so much that I wouldn't be having to do this speech if we simply started with the House mark. I've talked with my colleagues in North Carolina. I know that we can do that, and I believe that we can make sure that we do not break the promise of Donald J. Trump that he's made to the people who are on Medicaid today, Mr. President. But what we're doing, because we've got a view on an artificial deadline on July 4th that means nothing but another date and time, we could take the time to get this right if we lay down the House mark of the Medicaid bill and fix it.
And I will go so far as to say this. It's not just that Donald Trump is misinformed. It is that he is unwilling to ever be informed because he does not care about the American people and what they go through. If he actually cared for the American people and what they go through, then this bill wouldn't even be on the table to start with, because it is going to hurt a whole lot of people. We're going to see so many people lose, folks. At the end of the day, we're all going to suffer from this. And this will, at the end of the day, if it somehow makes it through, it's going to be Donald Trump's legacy. And it will eventually fall back on him. I have a feeling it'll probably fall back on him once he's long gone out of the picture and people looks back at it in hindsight and realizes what a disaster that it was. And I truly believe that historians will study this era in time, and they'll study Donald Trump, and they'll study the psychological makeup of his followers, the type of psychological makeup it would take to follow after a man who's never lived it. a man who doesn't know what he's talking about, but for whatever reason was able to convince a group of people that he had their best interests at heart. He never has. When it comes right down to it, right down to the crucial moments, he's never had this country's best interests at heart. He's only been in it for himself, really. Now, I could go on to say him and his billionaire buddies, and yeah, he loves to cozy up to them, and he loves to cozy up to dictators, but he cozies up to billionaires and to dictators because of his own insecurities and because of his own fragile ego. That's why Donald Trump does it. That's why he pals around with these people. He wants to be part of the club. You know, I've often wondered what would happen if, like, take, for example, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush. What if they were more, embracing of Trump? What if they just simply patted him on the back and said, man, you are doing a better job than we could have ever done? Because all he ever really wanted to be was part of the club. All he ever wanted to be was loved and appreciated. And I almost feel like that if those three had just patted him on the back hard enough and sucked up to him hard enough, they might could have stopped some of this insanity, because he goes strictly off of what he can get for himself. He does not care about people, and I will never believe it. You will never be able to convince me. There's nothing you could do or say that would convince me that Donald Trump gives a good goddamn about anything but his own self. I do believe he would sell out his own children, his own sons, his own daughters, his own grandchildren. I believe he would sell them out in this big, beautiful bill to get ahead in life. There was an old wrestler, one of my favorites back in the day, Arn Anderson. Now, I love the heels on wrestling. I just don't like the heels to be in the government running the show. But Arn Anderson used to say, I'm a guy that'll slap my granny in the mouth for 50 cents. I believe Donald Trump would do worse. And I have no faith in him as a human being or as a leader. And so I'm glad. I don't know a lot about Tom Tillis. I'm sure that if he was my senator here in Tennessee, I wouldn't be voting for him, because I know when that R is beside the name that there's really not very many out there that I have any respect for. But I at least have respect for him standing up in this moment and calling this out. Maybe it'll turn a few heads. Maybe a few people will look around and say, wait a minute, something don't sound right. Because, folks, this is really going to affect all of us. And I really don't want to be sitting here doing the videos years from now talking about how that we fucked around and found out when it come to this bill.